Thank you everyone for joining us for another one of Startup Canada's Women Entrepreneur webinars. So for those of you who have not participated so far in one of our webinars, Startup Canada is doing a series specifically for women entrepreneurs and marginalized women in particular, providing support during COVID-19, but also just general support in navigating the challenges of entrepreneurship and growing a business in Canada. So we are thrilled to have Priya today on our webinar, really talking about revamping both your internal and external comms strategies in light of COVID, but just some general tips that I'm sure everybody is really interested in learning and advancing within their businesses. So Priya, welcome to, I want to say welcome to the show. Welcome to the webinar. And Priya is the founder and president of One Milk, Two Sugars, a fantastic PR agency specializing in influencer marketing, social media, and media relations. So we're really excited for today's presentation to get some insights there, how to navigate this COVID-19 sort of situation that we find ourselves in, but also really organizing your communications and preparing for the future. I think that'll be an interesting sort of layer to pile on here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kayla Isabel, and I'm the Executive Director here at Startup Canada. In my past life, I was actually a strategic comms advisor and consultant for a number of years. So this is, you know, the content that makes my heart sing as well. So I'm thrilled to have you, Priya, on the webinar today. So maybe I'll pass things over to you to give a bit more of an introduction of who you are, how you landed in comms, and specifically looking at brands, and what we can expect from the webinar today.
Sure. Thank you, Kayla. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining some of you on your second webinar of the day. So the presentation that I'm going to take you through is really focused on brand communications. So we're going to look at different touch points of communications, whether internal or external, and really what I call it is recalibrating your brand's communication during a crisis. So essentially, we're living a moment of history. We're living through history right now. The earth is recalibrating, the planet is recalibrating. People are putting pause and reshifting their thoughts. And likewise, businesses need to also recalibrate their communications and think a little bit deeper into how they're going to be communicating to their stakeholders. So, a little bit about me. Thank you, Kayla, for the introduction. I figured I'll give you a little bit more about my background as an entrepreneur, since we're gonna be chatting for a half hour or whatnot. So the company that I founded is called One Milk, Two Sugars. We're an award-winning company in communication specializing in PR, influencer, social, and digital marketing. We now have offices across North America in Montreal, Toronto, and New York. In terms of my background, I've been an entrepreneur since 2004. So I like to think of myself as not only a storyteller, but a reinventor. I lived through the recession of 2008, 2009, and 10 that seemed to last forever, and had to really reinvent my business. So I launched a new entity in 2012 that has been steadily growing. What's great about working in agency, this is the world that I love because it allows you the opportunity to work with so many different brands. I've worked probably upwards of 500 different brands in the course of my career, really anything from kombucha to mattresses to fashion. We really have a wide client roster. Through the years, we've been able to get some great accolades from the Forbes Agency Council. I've been featured on Bloomberg, Globe and Mail contributor as well. But over and above everything, I'm a very fierce supporter of women in business. I volunteer with Mentoro, the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. And of course, it's a pleasure to be here with Startup Canada today.
Fantastic. And Priya, so as Priya goes through the presentation, we will obviously accept questions through that Q&A button that I was describing at the beginning, if anybody didn't hear that at the start. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can ask questions to the panelists and we will moderate them and take them. And then you can use the chat function just for comments, links for other content that might be relevant to the presentation. But we can keep this, as conversational as possible, and feel free to post questions at any time. We'll also have dedicated time at the very end. So if you don't get around to it, we'll have it there. So dive right in, Priya.
Thank you. I don't mind being interrupted, so feel free. I wanted to start with this quote that I really like, and it's for all the fellow entrepreneurs out there. So it goes off like this: the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts the sails. So I like to think of entrepreneurs, at least me personally, as a balance between an optimist and a realist. So one thing I think we have going for us during this time of great uncertainty, and of course it's unlike any uncertainty we know or have experienced, but one thing that we as entrepreneurs have done before is navigated unknown using our instinct. So really let's use this skill as we recalibrate our brand positioning and our business journey as well. Something that we've been noticing a lot through my agency, but really something that's probably going to be propelled even further, is really the shifting landscape of communications and what is sort of important in the consumer journey. It does complicate things in terms of the life of communication professionals, because it forces you to think a little bit deeper and dig a little bit harder. So whereas demographics, of course, important, now we're looking at something called value graphics. So not only knowing the demographic of your consumer, but understanding the values that are important to them as well. Of course, Kayla, you probably understand this. We used to be in the era of news wires. And of course, news wires are still essential to where we get our news today. But there's also the combination of news feeds, social media, and digital news that we get on the daily. And we're going to actually talk a lot about digital consumption in this presentation. Exposure is always important, but engagement is even more important today. The customer is, of course, paramount, but your community today, I think it's really obvious. It's a lot about the community today, more than just your consumer. Product is one thing, but having a purpose is a word that you're going to hear come up many times in this presentation. So purpose is everything. And brand awareness is one thing, but brand building is really what businesses should be looking at for long-term growth and success. So it always starts with the consumer. And I think it's important to really think about where we are today. I mean, what a phenomenon where the whole world is affected by the exact same situation. So really consumer sentiment is really important to think about in your approach in communications. So really at every touch point that you're going to be communicating, whether it's internal or external, you have to be extremely mindful of the current mindset. And we've put together here some stats for you that say 71% of Americans are now very concerned about the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, these stats apply to Canada as well. Insofar as even 2 weeks ago, only 50% were as concerned. So you can see that there is a growing concern. You know, just having fears of the health of your family, your personal health, your job security, the economy, spreading of the virus, you can imagine this has all been dramatically compounded, and there's a lot of anxiety out there. So really being mindful of the sensitization of the target consumer today and just the general public when you're putting out your messaging. So that's the first point we want to make sure we take heed to. Another interesting stat, only 37% of consumers want brands to continue to advertise as normal. So this is as recent a stat as March 26th. This is a very clear indicator that brands have to interact in a fundamentally different way. Brand purpose is something that is so essential to long-term growth and survival of your business. So if you don't have one yet, I encourage you to develop one, because it will help ensure that any activity during this time isn't perceived as profiteering, but it's a contribution to the community and greater good. So really dig a little harder. Any business can derive its brand purpose. In fact, we just did our own exercise in deriving what our mission is over and above just what we're selling. Really, what are we bringing in terms of for the community and for greater good? So this is also another interesting survey. It's a global one, and it really tells you how consumers are looking at businesses. So it shows you that consumers versus their government even are looking to large corporations or even local businesses to lead the charge, and they are approving of the responses of local businesses and corporations versus even their government. So this definitely signifies that you as an employer have a strong role to play in terms of a positive outlook for consumers today. We're going to start by looking at the very first thing, which is internal comms. So internal comms is your work family. That's what we like to call it. So it's really embracing your work family. And the 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer recently put out a COVID version. And it said that people felt that my employer was the most trusted institution over business in general and even over government and media. So that tells you that whatever scale or size business you have, you should feel that you have a very, very important role to play as an employer today. So these are a few of the tips that we are practicing, that I am practicing, that I encourage you to think about. Have a plan. I mean, like anything in life, it's important to know where you're going. And of course, with all this uncertainty, it's hard to really say that there's a concrete plan out there that you know what's going to be happening. You know, you see it even with Trudeau in terms of the responses he gives. There's no guarantee and there's no crystal ball. But knowing that letting your employees know that you have a broad outline, that you are positive about what's going ahead, that you will be looking at these measures daily. Ensure to stay well informed about all the government relief programs. I just got a message right before this webinar of further changes on rental relief measures being put out. So there are monumentous changes happening. So your job as an employer is really to be responsible and be up to date about all the government programs that are being offered and that are shifting on a daily basis. Ensure that you can answer questions related to job safety and security. And if you have to, take the advice of an HR consultant or even an employment lawyer if you need to. Communicate, share, and be open. Obviously, we're a communications agency, so we really promote communicating. But it's really important because worry and fear grow in the absence of up-to-date information. So even if it's no change and it's status quo, let them know. So let your employees know that they can expect regular updates from you and that they can approach you for any questions that they may have as well. Empathy could not be more important. You know, we as a business, my model is all about empathy and understanding. It's a stressful time. We're all of a sudden confined to our homes, and that work from home reality is different for everybody, whether it's somebody who's a caregiver, whether it's, parenting a bunch of kids running wild at home. Let's recognize that and let's be understanding. Do frequent check-ins, something that we like to do, you know, even having something like a buddy system, informal video chats, encourage taking regular breaks and getting outside for maybe a quick walk, and being just empathetic towards your work family. Another really important thing that a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, can get down about is that, yes, business is going to be impacted. It is not business as usual, but it's not something that's unique to you. It's really something that's happening to us all. So know that the work will be impacted and reassure your team that, yes, productivity is going to slow down and expectations will be shifting accordingly as well. So external communications, embracing your community. So it's, again, this word community is coming up. So if there's one thing that this virus has shown us is that we are one. We're one world, we're one community. With this notion comes a new era of communications where creating a sense of belonging for your consumers should be a priority. So here we put together some tips. Just want to take you through them. I mean, some of them are more important than others, but it gives you sort of like a general guideline on various touch points when you're communicating to your consumer. I've tried to keep it top line in general, considering there might be a variety of different business owners out there. So again, over communicate. Let your audience know that you're working on a plan, even if it's something in inception. People want to hear from you. You know, they don't want things to go all dark. They want to know that your brand cares about them and their well-being. Embrace your consumers. So, you know, if you have to cancel an event or close your store or perhaps have a shortage on your product, you just need to communicate these things to your consumer, stay transparent, and let them know that any decisions that you're making are really with them in mind, with your employees' best interests in mind, with your consumers in mind. In terms of information, there could be heightened frustration and impatience at this time. So make sure that, you know, things are easy to find, easy to navigate. If you're distributing important information, the best place is probably to post urgent news on the homepage of your website. Look at all your digital footprints. So email, sending out an email newsletter. I've been getting a few regular ones, not bombarded by, but a few regular updates from some of the brands that I follow, which I love to read. And communicate everything on your social media as well and stay up to date with that. We all know that visual aesthetic can impact your communications and color can be therapy. So use bright, positive, and calming colors as well. Authenticity is super important. Consumers are smart. They can see right through any sort of forced positivity. So really be as transparent and authentic as possible and stick to the facts. Another thing, sorry, I have a little buzz going on with my cell phone here. Level up on customer service. Customer service is essential right now, and there can be massive repercussions for not handling a customer comment well, especially online. So it's extremely important for brands to handle social media queries respectfully and quickly during this time of crisis. This actually leads us to our next section, which is going to be focused a lot on digital communication, since pretty much we're all living online right now and absorbing all the news we can through online. So I wanted to focus a little bit further on digital comms.
Can I ask a question for you, Priya, before you jump in there?
Yes.
With the cadence of communication. So I think that's feedback that we've, received from so many entrepreneurs, and like how they absorb information, how they're receiving information is very heavy. And, there's so many different sources that are providing different information. How do you recommend, as maybe entrepreneur support organizations, that we can really cut through that noise and make sure that we're only getting the essential, but the essential is changing every day? Do you have any advice on that side? And then also, as consumers of this information, how do you recommend that we, really target what information that we're hearing so that we don't get bombarded?
Yeah, I think that we've been going through phases of that. I think in the beginning, and you'll see a little bit about the rise, and there's a chart to show you the progression of digital consumption. I think that we're finding a little bit of a balance, I hope, as the weeks are going on. I think in the beginning, there was just so much doubt and uncertainty that people were scouring online, searching. Obviously, at a time like this, credible news outlets are really important. Mainstream media is extremely important. I know CBC is, for example, my go-to that, I like to listen to online or on TV. So I think it's important that there's a balance in the information you're digesting. Personally, what's been working for me is a morning and end of day check-in. I like to set that aside, and in between, I try to focus on my work, my day-to-day for as much as possible, my family. I do like to get broad, sort of like a broad overview of what's going on. I think the web, we can have the tendency to dig and dig and dig, and that can be really consuming and distracting. I think we have to be cognizant that this is going to take a while, and that in a day, we might not have that much more change. And I think that that's a little discouraging at the same time, because we really want to see that light at the end of the tunnel. So, I really encourage going to your reputed, credible media outlets at this time. I think it's obviously nice to break up that, with digital consumption and other brand communication, of course, rather than just hard news. Try to have a sense of normalcy as well during this process. So 29% of this is really interesting, because this sort of gives an opportunity for a lot of brands and businesses to explore their digital footprint. Whether they are a business that is currently selling online or has a presence online or doesn't. This is an opportunity for us to really think through a few of our marketing mix elements. So 29% of Canadian consumers are making online purchases when they normally would have shopped in store. So it really tells us that digital consumption is on the rise, and this sort of goes to what we were just speaking about. You can see from February up to March, just the augmentation in digital media consumption in Canada. So there's been overall an increase of almost 30% of the time spent online since the beginning of COVID. And in fact, almost 40% from mobile. So people are online more than ever. And it really allows brands with a great opportunity to reach a highly engaged and targeted consumer, but with with information that is timely and relevant and in the right context. So this leads to adapting your message. The world has totally turned on its head. So we need to make sure we revisit our plans, even if they were something that we put together as recent as February. I think that brands really need to re-look at every touch point of their communication in light of the consumer sentiment that we spoke about earlier and the changes that are impacting the world due to this pandemic. So especially online, digital strategy really can be super targeted and measurable as well. So really having the right message at the right time to the right audience. Put together a slide here on really something more relevant probably to people who have a online shopping experience. So we wanted to kind of go through some tips on best-in-class user experience. So really, as consumers are moving online, brands have to adapt to find ways to offer that same experience that they were getting in store, but now online. So here are a few tips. First and foremost, your website. So make sure that your content is achieving that visibility that you want through SEO, staying relevant and having valuable keywords to your business. So really optimizing your site for for reach. And in terms of checkout, I think you have to sort of review the whole process, the shopping experience online, and ensure there's no pain points that can trigger any frustration with your consumer. If possible, it would be great if there's some flexibility on payment methods, payment facility, just showing some flexibility and agility in that regard would be really appreciated. Offering free shipping, of course, that's an appreciated bonus, and a lot of businesses are doing that. If you have a live chat feature, if you can enable that just to offer any sort of customized and tailored advice to any new consumers that you might be tapping into. And manage expectations. Again, communicating clearly that maybe your business has been impacted by COVID. If there's delivery delays, product shortages, or backlog, just communicate that so expectations can be managed accordingly as well. Reevaluate your advertising. So this is something that not only applies to a digital strategy, but in general. So here's a quote by Coca-Cola in the UK that suspended all of their advertising, saying that we need to reevaluate things, understanding how they make a difference to our consumers, customers, and communities in the weeks and months ahead. So this is something that, is not something that happens very often, that you sort of have to hit pause and rethink your whole strategy. But at this time, customer behavior is changing as the situation is changing, and we need to be sensitive towards that. So highly recommend reviewing your advertising strategy and messaging ongoingly, and stay away from sort of hard sales tactics and overt drives to web or call to action.
So Priya, we have a question just about sharing some of this content on social media. So we have a question from Chantal asking, can she share some of this content in her social media feeds, snapshots of it, and crediting you and your organization as the source? Does that work for you?
Yes, of course. I also, if there's any stats that she wishes to share that I've shared, I've put some source credits under, but if she needs them, I can send them as well.
Great. Thanks, Priya.
All right, thank you. So influencer marketing, the big buzzword to any sort of marketing matrix. We see influencer marketing as being something that more and more brands are working with influencer partners to deliver relevant and engaging messages. And I think in COVID, this allows for sort of a different perspective and a third party to endorse your brand in a maybe more creative or a lighthearted approach than a hard sell from a brand perspective. So here are an array of benefits, whether you are already in the influencer marketing space or wanting to get into it. Here are a variety of benefits that I think could be obtained through getting involved. So number one, access to fresh content. Brands working with influencers are basically able to create beautiful assets, and they give them high quality images that brands can also be repurposing should that be in their agreements, but it gives a unique opportunity to have fresh content from a content creator. It's not just beautiful content, but it's content that resonates. Influencers tend to be very authentic and know their audience really well. So this is rather, much more subtle. It's less commercial, if you will, and it will allow a brand to communicate more authentically. The influencer is already a confirmed brand authority. Consumers are looking to influencers as a voice of authority. They look at them for recommendations. So brands working with influencers will naturally be better protected and established online. And boosting engagement. We talked about that word earlier on, engagement. Influencer partners give brands a window into organic communities. So it really delivers conversion, conversation, and boosts your online presence as well. So now, I don't have a COVID crystal ball, but I thought it would be important to sort of talk about where do we go from here, transitioning out of crisis mode. I think we're all waiting for this storm to pass and see this light, at the end of the tunnel. So one thing is for sure, I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but I think one thing is certain, that this experience will be launching a new era of communications. And I think it's going to be something that will impact every business. And it's important to take this downtime to really think about that. While it's important that we're pivoting our messaging and generating new leads and thinking about the situation, don't lose sight of your original goals, your long-term goals, and stay true to who your business is. So it's now the time to think long-term, but think about the fundamentals and values of your core business while making all those changes as well. Prioritizing social media. Social media will remain sort of, the window front or the face of your brand. It's the area where customer service and crisis management also happens a lot. So how you respond and embrace your community now will really be remembered and should only improve for the future. Digital dominance. So we can see that digital platforms have and will continue to be the dominant vertical for communications. So even when travel or events or out-of-home opportunities come back, your digital framework and strategy should be smarter and stronger. Fundamentally, good communication skills of yesterday will continue to be the good communication skills of tomorrow. But I think what this allows us to really re-strategize and think about is that brands that act with authenticity and integrity will thrive. So intent and tone have always been key pillars of communication, but going forward, acting responsibly and putting people, planet, and purpose over everything will be very, very meaningful. Flexibility. I think this has all taught us that, we may have plans, but life works in other ways. So it's super important to be nimble, to be agile, to ensure that your communication plan is very well integrated, leverage on multiple platforms as well, and also having some flexibility in your budgets, opening to shift funds around in case maybe a new opportunity or even a new medium arises. And last but not least, it always comes down to the consumer. So as the landscape is evolving, consumer behavior is going to continue to shift. Expect a new norm, and alongside with it, a change in purchase pattern, values, and expectations. So as long as you can keep that in mind every step of the way, I would always go back to your consumer. This is the starting point, and your people are everything. So really let the consumer behavior guide your plans now and into the future. And that concludes my presentation. I hope it was insightful and useful. And now my favorite part is talking to other people and hearing from them. So if there's any questions, I'd love to take them.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Priya. Yeah, so everyone is welcome to use the Q&A button on the very bottom or popping in the chat function. A question for you around sort of change comms. I know, and you mentioned sort of best practice communicating often and getting ahead of things and really making sure that you're being vocal. As businesses have to pivot and change even, what their businesses do, that, I might have been a distillery and now I'm selling hand sanitizer. How do you recommend communicating as your business shifts completely if what you're offering is different? How do you manage that from a comms perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, we're actually in the middle of working on a program for one of our clients that are actually launching something new, reinventing something that's a spin-off of their existing business. I think it needs to be a cautious approach for sure. I think it's a delicate balance because, again, the ultimate objective, you have to really understand it. So think about what is the objective you wish to obtain from that communication getting out there. Is it something that can be perceived maybe again as capitalizing on a situation? I think a lot of brands tend to, look for their reputation to be furthered through this opportunity. We have to be super, super mindful and careful of that. If, again, it aligns with the principle of the brand and the brand's values, I think that makes sense. And I think that if you have a strong brand identity and a brand purpose, if you do launch something different that's an extension of or different from what you've currently been doing, I think people will accept it and see it as authentic. But it really depends on your communications approach. So I would really take it very, very cautiously, think really carefully about the ways that you're going to be communicating that and maybe roll that out step by step.
Fantastic. Then what is a good resource to refer to for updates on consumer behavior online?
Oh, wow. Consumer behavior. I used a number of, actually, what's been really, really great these days is that a lot of these statistical companies are offering free access to a lot of their tools, which previously were not really obtainable. Something that I've used here is Global Web Index. I've also used Nielsen. Nielsen, actually, I can even send it later, but Nielsen put out, and it's really quite difficult to get access to Nielsen's, but they have a video online that you can actually go through and talks about all kinds of shifts in consumer behavior and purchase pattern, industry. It's probably a good hour, and it's available online. But I mean, there's a gamut. Those are just a few examples.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a few more questions. So our organization is a not-for-profit with a social enterprise model. We work closely with industry and educators and depend heavily on sponsorships. How do we communicate with empathy while still generating revenue to help our organization continue to work? Great question.
Oh, wow. What is the actual business? Sorry, did they?
A nonprofit social enterprise. Not sure if we can find out the actual.
Okay.
They work with industry and educators, but are heavily dependent on sponsorships. It's called Build a Dream.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. I mean, I think if you are already a non-for-profit business, the positivity towards your business model is already there. This is something that's a fundamental to who your business is. It was your existence was based on that before. So I think it's understandable when you're a non-for-profit that you still depend on sponsorship to kind of progress. So I don't think it would be taken as off-putting in a time like this if it's for social good and your brand has purpose and value at this time, then I think it needs to be, I think the messaging could be tweaked and in the approach in which you deliver. However, I don't think it's a time that you should feel that you need to put a halt on that activity. Of course, it's going to be more difficult at a time like this to get sponsorship funds, but I don't think it's something that could be taken negatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's something that many are struggling with, that it's especially because we have a social impact program and many of our entrepreneurs are working in this social enterprise space, exactly as just documented there, that it sort of feels potentially icky or disingenuous to be promoting yourself. But at the end of the day, you have to be paying your employees, you have to be bringing in revenue, or you have to keep the lights on. So I think it's balancing that, but understanding that our audience, that everybody knows that this is the world that we're living in at the moment. So I think remembering that we're all in this sort of similar whack world situation at the moment, that that's not a secret.
No, not at all. And I think, again, that sense of community is really important, and helping something that we really want to start doing is highlighting other Canadian businesses that have been reinventing themselves or that have a social purpose, and just sort of helping in any way we can to keep businesses alive today, because albeit there are relief programs, many businesses won't make it there if things don't change fast enough. And, as an entrepreneur, I can really relate that that's extremely painful.
Yeah. Okay. So another question, more on the internal comm side of things. So how do you authentically communicate to employees who are feeling anxious or insecure about their careers at this time? That's a great question.
Yeah, I think the anxiety that people are having, it's a really important topic, and it's not something that we should be ignoring or not bringing forward. Something that we are doing, something that I was just thinking about the other day was just anything that's positive. If you surround yourself, like the law of attraction, basically. So for me, I just want to be surrounded by positivity and positive news. So something that we just decided to do, something super simple, and we're going to be launching it this week. Some of my team doesn't know about this yet, but anyways, we're going to be launching it. It's called the Weekly Wins. So it could be anything as small as, maybe getting a response from a reporter that we've never spoken to, or maybe it's retaining a client for another month, whatever it might be. It's really something that we just want to share amongst our team. So embracing anything that's positive right now and anything that is good can uplift spirits. For sure, as an employer and business owner, you have a responsibility to the livelihood of your team. and you take that with a lot of heart. So I know it's difficult, but I think just embracing anything that's positive, anything that's good at this time, and forging that open communication will make them come to you as well, and know that they can be honest with you and you'll be honest with them.
Mm-hmm. And it's that balance, right? That it going too positive could potentially erode that trust with employees or with staff. So embedding that positivity and finding opportunities there, but also acknowledging this is, an anxiety provoking
Situation.
So it's sort of that balance. But definitely a tough position to be in for all employers. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, another question on that similar line. So in the case that an employer unfortunately has to lay off a wide number of employees due to the pivot in their business, do you think that this is something that needs to be addressed publicly to avoid potential backlash?
I guess it depends on the scope, size, scale of the business, I would say. And again, publicly, I assume that they mean publicly, externally, outside of their company. Listen, I think the situation is unanimous for a lot of people, and a layoff or a furlough or a temporary layoff, what have you, sometimes are a necessary means to make sure that employee has a business to come back to one day. And I think that that's something that is often, forgotten, because not everybody sees it from the business owner's perspective, but sometimes you have to take measures that will allow them to have a job to come back to, that will sustain the survival of the business. So that is really the ultimate goal from conducting layoffs. It's not something that employers want to do. We're also building up our talent and our business. So obviously having to revert back and go backwards is not something that people want to do, but it really is to a certain point to sustain the survivability of the business. So I don't think it's something that needs to be communicated. And even if it was communicated, I don't think it would be taken negatively, because it's just something that unfortunately has been experienced across the board here in Canada and across the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen a couple of examples of groups in our network that, have been heavily events-based organizations that have, taken pauses for the next 6 months to reassess and temporarily, lay off employees. Some great examples that I've seen as well is using that message, not in focusing on that layoff, but using it as a space to say, hey, we have all these incredibly talented staff who are now looking for work. What can my community come back and respond to this message with freelance work or other opportunities? So there's also, I think, creative ways to position, that pivot in their business resulting staff losses, but also trying to find some opportunities for those staff through that message. That could be something. Okay. Another question. So I have an online marketplace that's food and home that offers local products from Canadian artisans. While everyone is hopping on the buy local train, I wanted to pivot with a new brand that focuses more on home products than food, that are sustainable at first and local, in addition to rebranding them to introduce this added focus. Would this be the right time to do so? And how would you suggest going about if so? So I guess looking at that pivot, it would now be an appropriate time to pivot the business of both sustainable and local products.
I think that, I have a lot of questions related to that. I think if it's something that can be done cautiously, investment-wise, and aligns with the mission and purpose of the business, and can be executed along the same path and distribution channels that are already existing, then I think it can be done. Truth is that a lot of the businesses and brands that we're working with today have reevaluated, rejigged their communication strategy, but are still moving ahead on certain plans that they had in place. So I don't think we should be necessarily inhibited by that. I just think that right now, to get visibility to a new business is obviously harder, just because everyone is quite consumed with other, messages, other anxieties, other concerns. But if it's something where you already have an existing clientele, you have an existing database, and it's something that can be repurposed easy enough with low investment, I don't see that it should be something you should hold back on. But again, have some sort of broad plan, some sort of outline of expectations, and a forecast, if you can, for the next short term, whether it's the next 2 months, what you expect to get out of it, just setting that expectation even with yourself. This is what I want to achieve from this. This is my objective. This is what I hope to get out of this in the next 6 months.
Fantastic. Great. This is more of a comment, but somebody as a board member of a local chamber of commerce wondering how annual business award celebrations will look like post-COVID. As business are struggling, promoting sponsorships is the last thing on their mind, or maybe sort of celebrating awards. Do you have any thoughts on the comms piece there?
Yeah, well, a lot of the awards that we that we enter around this time of year are for the year prior. So it's really for the year that has passed. I think that, again, a lot of those organizations are definitely going to take heed in their, awards events that they will be putting on later this year. Probably some of the rules, regulations will change for the judging year of 2020, let's say. And I think we'll probably take note of that to come. But this year is really looking at last year for the most part. And as we go forward, we'll probably have to see that shift in overall strategy and comms.
Yeah, and I can speak to that from our perspective at Startup Canada a little bit. We launched our Canada Awards for Innovation and Entrepreneurship that was right before COVID, and that we were assessing sort of as things hit. But what we have done is really pivoting. We were recognizing innovation and entrepreneurship, and so now we're positioning it celebrating innovation and entrepreneurship during this exceptional time. So it happened to sort of be in line, but I think there's still a great place to celebrate what we're seeing in the entrepreneurship community. But recognizing that, there have been tremendous difficulties, and being sensitive to those that, are no longer in business and that are struggling. So definitely two sides on that. Then somebody else is asking for a reference for the studying consumer behavior in the medical device industry, if that could be posted into the chat.
Okay,
cool.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions from our audience before we wrap up with Priya? You can pop it in the Q&A function. I think maybe one last question from me, Priya. If you had to pick one thing that would be sort of an outcome from this webinar presentation, or one call to action, what would be the first thing that you'd recommend our audience to leave with today?
Oh, that's an easy one for me, because it's something that I have been quite focused on, is finding your brand purpose. So really, really honing in on that, identifying over and above what product you're selling or service you're selling, really, what is your raison d'être? Like, what is your reason for being? What are you what is your business going to be about beyond just product or service? So brand purpose, brand mission, I think that is an exercise that if you haven't done it already, highly encourage you to think about that, because it's going to sort of solidify the fundamentals of who your business is and give you all the guiding principles you need to succeed through these uncharted waters.
I love that. And I'm sorry, we have one actual last question. So what would you recommend for immigrant businesses? I work with internationally trained professionals and entrepreneurs. Are there any comms considerations for an international audience?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. So if the audience, is global, is that what the question is? It's a global audience?
Or immigrant businesses, like if there's a specific angle, because she's working with internationally trained professionals and entrepreneurs, but they are in Canada. Sorry.
They are in Canada. Okay. Yeah, again, context, I need a little bit more context in there. But I think, right now we're all definitely much more culturally sensitized. Myself this morning, I was looking at what's happening in Italy, what's happening in China. I think that these are something that we're highly sensitized as a community culturally to begin with. I think people that are immigrants are facing certain situations here, definitely that we should be recognizing. So again, it really depends on what the context is of that business. I would have to know a little bit more.
And perhaps I can recommend as well, we actually had on Tuesday, Miriam Lazarte did a similar webinar for our Women Entrepreneur Program. And she supports immigrant entrepreneurs and really focuses on this immigrant business space. So that could be a space to check out that webinar and reach out to Miriam, because she's a great champion to reach out there. Fantastic. So I think we're happy to wrap up. Priya, thank you so much for this wonderful session. We've already received some comments and saying that this was a fantastic session with tons of great materials and things to think about. Wonderful. Love the focus on being authentic, reinforcing the core purpose of your business and organization. Thank you. So thanks, Chantal, for that feedback to Priya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Kayla, and thanks everyone for joining.
bet. So as you see on your screen, if you have questions, you can grab a virtual coffee with Priya with potentially 2 milks and 1 milk and 2 sugars.
Customize your coffee, however you take it.
There you go. There you go. So for those of you who are interested in continuing with the Women Entrepreneur Program, so as you know, for many of you that have been participating over the last couple of weeks, we have them every Tuesday and Thursday on different topics for women entrepreneurs. We do have another series that is happening on Thursday, talking about great customer service as a habit, not a moment. So very much in line with the conversation that we've had today with Sherry Moss. What we are also going to be launching and have launched a series of entrepreneur town halls. So a similar format, really providing an opportunity for entrepreneurs to connect with their local MPs across Canada. So we've had the pleasure of connecting with MP Sahota, MP Allison, and our next one was with MP Johns, who are all members of the All Party Entrepreneur Caucus. So stay tuned on Startup Canada's channels for those additional spaces to get information about Government of Canada's resources, but also just an update to the entrepreneur community there. We also have a number of COVID-19 resources and specifically alerts for entrepreneurs that provides up-to-date information from the Government of Canada on subsidies, financial support, and really the key things that our entrepreneurship community needs to know right away, trying to cut through some of that noise that we're talking about with the information overload. So stay tuned with Startup Canada's content there. But thank you again, Priya, so much for joining us today. I know I definitely learned a lot and was reminded of these wonderful best practices. So thanks for taking the time to spend the afternoon with Startup Canada.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.